question is, there were other countries with a better response to COVID than the US. I think I agree with this. I think we could have shut down a little bit more. I think we could have taken a more immediate response. I also think vaccines are super important. And in my opinion, I think we should have kind of required them a little bit more and maybe given some more information about the vaccines and debunking myths about them. Because I personally am pro-vaccine. I think it's really important to keep people safe.
I agree with everything you said. Yeah, definitely could have handled the vaccine thing better and really encourage everyone to get the vaccine, seeing that
it saves lives.
It saves, yeah.
There were other countries with a better response to COVID than the US. I think I would definitely agree with that statement. I haven't read too much about it, but what I've seen in the news is that the response in the US was very slow compared and very loose during the Trump administration.
The pandemic had the biggest impact on health. And that's definitely true. I think that people became a lot more conscious of the kind of baseline of their health, but I also think that it really kind of made health into a capitalist concept, and people stopped believing in what things work.
There were other countries with a better response to COVID than the US, and I would agree with this. I think the US definitely didn't handle COVID as well as it could have, and I think that definitely increased the amount of time it took to get it under control and get to the point we're at now. So I definitely think that's a reasonable analysis to make.
There were benefits and costs of travel restrictions, and I feel like I do agree with that a lot because during that period, as I remember, a lot of there was a lot of interstate sort of misunderstanding. I remember Kenya and Tanzania for some reason couldn't allow their goods to go to the other country, or they will take too much time, and so most of the goods would get damaged before they get to the market, and that really costed a lot of farmers. And just for the two countries where most a big percentage of the GDP depends on farming and farm produce, there was a lot of losses on the same. I am also aware that there were people who ended up missing up on opportunities like school or stuff like that simply because of that. But if you look at it in the long run, they were trying to help. They were trying to prevent the spread of this contagious disease. And so even though that was a cost, I feel like it was a worthy cost because they were trying to keep us alive. So yeah,
there were benefits and costs of travel restrictions. I feel like this isn't an opinion. I think it's just a fact. I mean, obviously there was costs in limiting somebody's capability of making decisions, especially just as an American. It's a very important thing for us, since freedom is one of the fundamental rights that we constantly repeat out loud. But yeah, there was also benefits. The fact that it limited spreading from countries that were doing really well, like New Zealand, who had some of the lowest COVID rates, is because of how restrictive they were when it came to international travel. So yeah, I don't think this is an opinion. I think it's just a fact.
Pandemic had the biggest impact on education. Honestly, I wouldn't say the pandemic had the biggest impact on education, but rather the students. I feel like a lot of the students struggled a lot with mental health issues. At least I know I did. And that really impacted my academics and who I was as a person. So I feel like it wasn't education necessarily impacted, but the students' well-being.
The pandemic had the biggest impact on health. I think it definitely had a huge impact on how it showed inequalities in our healthcare system and how people couldn't have proper access to healthcare. And then I also think it really, really obviously affected people's bodily health, but also people's mental health, just with extreme isolation and dealing with family members dying and not being able to see them and just things like that. So out of everything I've ever experienced in my life, yeah, I would agree.
So it says the pandemic had the biggest impact on employment. I don't think that's true. I feel like the deaths maybe outweigh the Like, just like if we're talking global, I don't know.
Different populations experience the pandemic differently, and I would agree to this assertion because of like personal like experience. Because like personally, I'm Mexican, right? And like the Mexican community in Chicago, they're very densely populated in one area, and so it's easy to see like distinctions that happen within the population. And I'd say that they didn't really care about the pandemic was going on. So that's my take.
The pandemic had the biggest impact on education. Definitely agree, because I think for me, I was in 8th grade when the pandemic happened, so that kind of influenced how I started high school. And then with the pandemic, it also changed a lot with college admissions. So people who were affected by the pandemic, you had test optional options, and then you kind of had to explain why your grades were a certain way, especially because of the pandemic. And I think there was a lot of grace giving during that time. So yeah, I definitely think that the pandemic left a lasting mark on education.
The pandemic had the biggest impact on health. I definitely agree and disagree at the same time. I think it had the biggest impact on health during my generation, but I feel like there was bigger things, especially like the influenza epidemic. But yeah.
Governments overreached in their pandemic restrictions. Agreed.
The pandemic had the biggest impact on health, yes. Especially, mental health, yes. And actually physical health too, because you couldn't go to the gym. Yeah.
Different populations experience the pandemic differently. Well, that's to say that's true, because most people, not everybody, came out of like their pandemic restrictions at different times, whether it be lockdown or closed borders, or even just opening of non-essential places. Other countries were at their own pace. I know some countries were almost next to fully recovered by the end of that same year, whilst others took more of their own time to get to their own pace. So I do think that this is a sensible opinion, but it feels less than an opinion.